Hi, my name is Robert Chelle with Chelle Law, and I'm an attorney that assists physician assistants with employment contract and independent contractor agreement issues. Today I'm going to talk about non-competes for physician assistants. So just kind of a little breakdown of what goes into a standard non-compete and then some red flags to think about. All right, first, are you in a state where they are enforceable? That's the first thing you need to determine. There are a handful of states where non-competes are completely unenforceable for healthcare providers or any professions for that matter. And so you need to identify if you're in one of those states. That's the first thing. There are, I'd say many states have enacted limitations or restrictions on non-competes, mostly geared towards healthcare providers over the last, 3 to 5 years. But many of those states have only allowed those changes to apply to physicians, and they have not extended those to PAs yet, or NPs, or any other kind of healthcare related profession. So that's the second thing you need to determine. Are you in a state that's recently enacted laws, and do those extend to PAs? Because in many states at this point they do not. I expect in the future they will be extended, but in some states they just haven't. So that's another thing you need to think about. All right, so what goes into a standard non-compete really is 3 parts. It has the scope, meaning what can't you do for the restricted period. 2, how long it lasts. Is it a year? Is it 2? And then what's the geographic restriction? Is it 5 miles? Is it 20 miles? And let's kind of go through each point and some of the things you need to be concerned about or aware of. First, this is the most important point for a PA, scope. Because a PA can do a ton of different specialties very easily, you need to make sure that the scope of what you can't do is specific to the employer that you're working for. And let me give a few examples. If you're working as a hospitalist, your contract needs to state you can't work as a hospitalist, within the geographic area, and that's it. You don't want it to extend to you can't work as a physician assistant in that area. Now, whether a non-compete for a hospitalist even makes any sense is, I guess, another matter. It doesn't, but that would be one example. Or if you were working in orthopedics, you wanted to say the physician assistant can't work in orthopedics for 1 year and 15 miles from the primary practice area, and that way it gives you options. You can do, maybe you love ortho and you want to stay in it, that's great. But if you have to stay in the area and it's not possible that you work 15 miles away from wherever your clinic is, do something else for a year, switch back to it when that restricted period is over with. You just want options. So that's the first thing, is limit the scope to what you're doing for the practice. And last thing, if you're just doing family medicine, once again, make sure it says family medicine. That way you can do urgent care or be a hospitalist or do ED. That gives you options as well. All right, so that's the first thing. Now, how long it lasts. So what's the temporal restriction? Generally 1 year is considered a reasonable non-compete. Anything beyond that, 2 years plus, not considered, or at least I wouldn't consider that reasonable. So you want to limit whatever the restriction is to a maximum of 1 year. You won't see less than 1 year generally. So 1 year is, like 90% of the contracts that I review have a 1 year restriction. And then the last thing is the geographic restriction, and this one can be a little confusing to some people. So first, it has to have some kind of geographic limitation. So as I said before, 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles. And it's as the crow flies, meaning it's not like a street 5 miles. It is a direct, 5 miles from the point of whatever the practice area is, and just do a big circle around it. So that's the first thing to think about. Now, what's considered a reasonable geographic restriction? Well, that kind of depends upon the state you're in and the setting. If you're in, New York City, then maybe a few blocks would be considered a reasonable geographic restriction. Whereas if you're in rural Idaho, maybe 20 or 30 miles might be considered more reasonable. So that's another thing you need to think about. Now, ideally, it would only be from your primary practice area. So maybe you're working in multiple clinics. You don't want it to list every place that you worked. You would prefer to only have it at your primary practice location, meaning the place where you generated the majority of your charges. One huge red flag is if you're working for maybe a larger organization that has a ton of offices in the area. You don't want it to apply to every office that they own. Sometimes I'll see that language. That's not fair, that you're restricted from working everywhere simply because they have offices, all over a city. It should just be where you are providing personally performed services. Next, there needs to be a look back period, meaning let's say you work for an employer for 10 years, and in year one, you worked at some office, 20 miles away for a week or so. Well, if there's not language that limits that, they could theoretically said, well, you perform services there while employed for us, so the non-compete attaches to that. A 12-month look back would be like a reasonable amount of time, meaning it only applies to any of the places that you worked for the last 12 months and doesn't extend back, far beyond that. That's another tricky one. So those are the some of the things to think about when you're about to sign a non-compete for a physician assistant. Scope, time, geography, and if you kind of dial all those in, hopefully it won't have a huge negative effect on your career, at least for the short term. So if you have any questions about an employment agreement or independent contractor agreement, feel free to contact my law firm. All of our contact info is listed below in the description. And I appreciate you watching the video. All right, thanks. Take care.